Welcome to Kalitribune podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about confusion that people in Europe and further west get through following media and trusting media too closely on the one hand, and on the other hand, expecting from themselves to be able to grasp the truth about what's happening around them, or even far from them, but around them in the sense of being present in media image, at daily or weekly basis. Now, this is something I talked a lot about before, especially maybe I would say up to 3 years ago when I started commenting on a Russian media incursion or Russian information. I wouldn't call it warfare, more like terrorism of the low intensity, because this information warfare term is very loaded. I don't like it, so I'll try to invent another one until the end of this podcast. So bear with me. Now I am pulling this subject up again because now it can be reiterated with more meaningful content, or even in a better form of exposition because of the crystallization of the situation in political sense. Of course, I'm talking about this de facto European war or World War III in the making, or let's say not even only de facto, but all-out new Cold War, where anybody with an ounce of brains can see what's going on. I mean, situation is not unconfusing, don't get me wrong, but Russians are playing poker with open hand now. It's obvious to everybody. Now, in my previous podcast, I have to reiterate it. I said some things about what I consider to be Russian mentality, and how unpredictable it is by its essence and of its essence. So I'm not making any predictions now. The thing that you can now better foresee what Russians will do doesn't mean by their logic doesn't mean that you will guess correctly, especially when it comes, and I'll just mention this without elaboration, the use of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. I think people who are excluding this from their political calculations where Russia is concerned are gravely mistaken. But let's leave that to those who like to make predictions. I don't. Now, what I was meaning to talk about was people clinging to a kind of conviction that they have to make what one podcaster called, I heard him say it just recently, map of ideas or brain maps of the world. It's quite a good term for quite evil or rotten or bad phenomena, something that shouldn't be, in my opinion. That is to say, a drive to have a system, that is to say, intellectual system or even intellectual imagery that you need to approach anything happening to you, to go through life in general. Now, this is not really, in my opinion, a quality of human intellect and quality of human nature, that is to say, the need to have something like this. It is something, I would say, that is rather a product of terminal weakness in us contemporary people, terminal weakness that was potentiated by the prevalence of internet and accessibility of the huge quantities of information. And mind you, information is something that comes in category of quantity, and this is very important to remember. Not something I haven't said before, but it's always worth repeating. And by the way, repetition in philosophy, repetition of truth, is the whole history of philosophy. and because the essence that you're trying to convey that cannot be expressed in propositional language has to be circled around. You have to, as Plotinus would say, for instance, you have to go around it, talk around it, always pinpointing it from a different point on the trajectory of the circle, because it is in the center, which you cannot reach in this life, let's say. So repeating true things is not what scholastics called nugatio. Nugatio meaning empty repetition of the same words. No, it is always the expression of the same essence in, let's say, other qualifications. That's why, for instance, just to give you an example, scholastics, real, true, high scholastics, called transcendentals, or these modes in which creation exists, which reflect creation as a creation of a creator, as being and truth and so on. They are convertible. So when you say being and you say true, you say the same thing, but not in the nugatio sense, that you are just repeating empty words, because you are pinpointing something new by this different expression. It's of course subject in itself. Just want to illustrate. When I make digressions, I always say probably the best thing I can say, but then I have to move back to my main point, which I'll try to do now. So there is no need for anybody in this world to have mental maps of the world. No need. The only being in this world that needs mental maps as this essential need, as a compulsive need, is ego. And ego, as you know, probably listening to me, is a metaphysical category in my optics. Of course, it can be psychological. It has many modifications, but I always consider it as a metaphysical principle, or rather, counter principle. It's not principle in a true sense of the word. It's an inversion of principle. And ego exists only in projections, only in reflections of its own image back from something other from it. Only problem being that for ego, the other really doesn't exist. It cannot conceive the other. It cannot give any significance to the other. Therefore, when people are confused, angry, feel betrayed because they don't get accurate information and they cannot make sense how this good traditionalist, Orthodox Christian Vladimir Putin turns out to be such a idiot and lunatic, and why, on the other hand, cancel culture, so-called in the West, and woke, cannot be combated then, because as it is evil, Putin must have been good. If people are feeling about these facts just described way, they don't deserve any kind of aid, intellectual or otherwise. They are lost, because the moment this is not authentic. Now, Kalitribune exists to analyze, mostly these destructive tendencies. Although in years I started to shift it in a direction of positive, affirmative content, of rather affirming truth than unmasking lie. And unmasking lies is quite a feat. I mean, I'm not some kind of intellectual Batman. This is something that has this romantic connotation. Somebody who is not really a kind of like superhero of philosophy. It's pretty funny that he is unmasker of lies, but there is some truth to it that we here try to unmask, that ugly that ugly feature of being, the non-being in its midst. So there is no need for people to have these maps, to kind of have, and one map of meaning would be Russia good, West bad, or, and this is a pitch, West itself, because I am not really sure what this word means. Now I am Westerner, I'm Croat. I'm Westerner from the part of Europe that is, to a large extent, so different than Anglo-Saxon Rim, for instance, or Nordic part of Europe, as if it is another world. Not only in languages, culture, but I know, mainly in the fact that it is still religious to a large extent, and even, I would say, talking about Croatia concretely, even more than before the Cold War, first Cold War. Now this is, we have second Cold War now, getting hotter every day. This is, for instance, this difference is huge. This is something that makes a huge difference. So when we take stand against Russians, and we Croats are always in a position that we have trouble with Russia's little cousin towards east, although Russia and Croatia have pretty good relations, and Russian, contrary to what I heard some internet talking heads say, Russian influence is very strong in Croatia, unfortunately. There, as is in Slovenia too, wouldn't you believe it? But that's story in itself. So our relationship towards Westernity, being Western, is something else from English one. It's something completely different. You cannot put us in the mental map. That's what I want to say, together with Swedes or Brits and others. That mental map won't work. It won't be coherent, because reality is superior to it. And I love reality. I don't like imagery, imaginary forms that are replacing reality. So when those mental maps break down, nobody should feel any remorse. They should be destroyed. So I get to be very, very sarcastic or ruthless and hurt people, probably, even because people, I don't really care, because people who are motivated by this mental maps making, they are motivated by ego, and there is no mercy towards ego. There should be no mercy. On the other hand, you have people who are really suffering because of lies. For instance, Ukraine, I had some comments about what I had to say about it, and then I see the typical reiteration of propaganda that is dehumanizing opponent when somebody says that NATO is doing the same thing it did in Sarajevo being capital of Bosnia, for those who don't know, which was under the siege for 3 years. And no, NATO did nothing in Sarajevo. If it did, it wouldn't be under siege 3 years, where they were shooting people like fishes in the barrel. I mean, it was this disgrace. I see that repeated, and I know that this kind of imagery that comes from Russians, from Serbs, from European New Right, and such people, such sources, is evil in its essence, because it has to do with not simply with changing of history, of imposing a false image, but of justifying further destructive political projects. There is a pragmatic reason why this is abroad. So that's one thing. Yeah. But people who are really suffering, people who are on the receiving end of propaganda campaigns are really suffering, and this is where truth has to be said in one sense. Truth, but mainly truth must be said in a principled way. It must be sought as something that has to do not really so much with history, but with what transcends history, with principle and with origin. And everything has to be, at least I think so, everything has to be understood in the light of origin. So, for instance, I give you an example of what I mean, agape or caritas, that means love, a Christian love, which is a very specific thing, is this ability to observe everything as much as possible for human being in God's eye, like God sees it. That is to say, to be even more precise, this is ability to see everything in God, as originated by God, as God's creation. And this means love is for the sake of God. So you don't love your child in a Christian sense because it's your child. You love it because he or she is God's creation. This is love. And in our prayers, in Catholic prayers, you have this plea, "Oh, make my love perfect, make my love more perfect," and so on and so on. So when somebody prays for this, the object of prayer is very specific. So it's not this emotional kumbaya or something, or new age, or something that unfortunately a lot of clergy will try to portray it for you. It will be portrayed in this way, but that's certainly not the case, and you don't have to be much of an expert to understand that. So this is the truth in eminent sense, and or analogy to truth in eminent sense, because this is something even greater than simply contemplating the truth. This is an active thing. And these are important things. The maps of meaning are not, to borrow the term from Jordan Peterson, who is surprisingly silent, by the way, in the last month or something, probably because he had some hopes for Russia as an influence in this world. And if it is true, and I think it is, this only displays how poor intellectual capacities this man has. I mean, one more digression, but I have to say it. I tried watching his debate with Zizek. He lost in the first minute. It was obvious. I have a hindsight of somebody who knows where Zizek comes from, and this kind of classical modern philosophical education where you have to master Hegel to be somebody of Zizek's stature. It was a case in Yugoslavia, and those people are experts in mincing words and dialectics. Peterson had no chance. Peterson doesn't understand F of philosophy. He has absolutely no knowledge of philosophy. His knowledge and the things that get his juices flowing like Nietzsche and Jung in combination. This is something that happens to you when you are 24, 25, when you graduate. You discover this deep modern, let's say, synthesis of psychology and philosophy and so on. I think you discovered the world of meaning. You discovered nothing. You discovered one side note in the history of deviation of classical philosophy. So, but maps of meaning, this is why I digress, because I want to say that maps of meanings are something that is rather worthless. People who need them compulsively are compulsively making themselves worthless also. So no quarter to either side, I say. the side of the West, for instance, side of the Russia. Things get opposed by these dialectics of ego. I say, as I told you, West is not a monolith. The West, most people are using now in online discussions and even in academia, is the Russian notion of the West, because Russia has this oppositional mentality where they are constant. They have this image of an enemy. This enemy is enemy in a theological sense. It is the devil. It is not anything less than devil, mind you. And I think the events will prove me right, if not arguments. Unfortunately, because things like this are always proved by blood, not by words, unfortunately. So this has to be a monolith for them. It is not a monolith. I am not Easterner in the sense that I'm something like Russian or Asiatic, but I'm not Westerner in the sense Americans are Westerners. I was, incidentally, I was browsing what so-called traditionalist, Catholics and Orthodox both, and they are changing these confessions very easily. We're discussing, for instance, our old friend Alexander Dugin, where Alexander Dugin was talking about Third Rome and how Russia will re-establish itself as such, and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, classical Dugin dribble. Those people are taking this seriously. And just to illustrate what this means, they have a discussion about, and I paraphrase, Russians trying to reintegrate church and state. So that this what is happening in Ukraine is about that. And then they discuss whether they'll be able to pull this off, and they consider they won't, because it's unrealistic, but in essence that it is the right thing to do. And then Catholic and Orthodox will discuss filioque on a good grounds. For those who don't know, filioque is this age-old dispute between Orthodox and Catholic Church about Trinity and the relationship of Holy Spirit and other two persons of Trinity. Doesn't matter. Now, this is beyond insane. This is not having touch with reality in the fullest sense of the word. To be more precise, having absolutely no history. You have to be completely extracted from history in order not to see anything wrong in this crazy statement. One very similar thing was when Trump won the election in USA. I saw two guys discussing, is he a new Constantine, Emperor Constantine? And when I ridiculed this, somebody asked me, why are you ridiculing it? What are your arguments? You don't have arguments. I mean, you can give arguments, of course. But you can, to have an idea, for instance, that this New York millionaire can be compared to Emperor of Rome. With all the traditions of Rome that was still very explicit at that time. I'm saying this because most of the Roman traditions are still implicit in our own world. That's what time of Constantine is, of course, the time when Rome was really Rome. I mean, to compare the two, to compare someone from the late antiquity with someone from modernity come post-modernity is completely insane. You do that only without second thought, only if you are not living in history. And I have a feeling a lot of people in the West don't live in history. And to get back to my point, I don't see how I share the same civilization with them. And I'm not overreacting here. This is a kind of thinking that is so alien that I could say, for instance, that some Russian ideas, some of which I talked in my previous podcast, which I consider deluded and wrong and so on and so forth, are more understandable to me than these Western ones. Maybe even less destructive, although I don't think that one destruction that has intent to go to absolute destruction can be compared with other destruction with the same trajectory. They end up one. And this brings me to our final point, that if we are talking about evil, if we are talking about lies, we are talking about essentially something that should be one thing, because all that is one. Evil is not in a true sense of the word, but nevertheless, once you talk about it, you are talking about one being, one being. And we are talking about, for instance, evil of Russia, evil of impending world war, maybe. On the other hand, we have evil of somebody who is so deluded that he changed his sex into woman, winning swimming championship, and people are seriously debating, is it right or is it wrong, whereas it is obviously so wrong that the guy should be, or lady should be, whatever he or she is, should be laughed out of existence. This is also evil. This is uncompromisingly evil because it is uncompromisingly a lie. This is denial of reality. And after you deny reality, you'll deny a creator of reality. Don't you worry about that. You atheists who think that there is no such creator, it all ends up in the end in this revolutionary politics. It turns to be against him. But that's another issue, of course. So how can this be one? I don't know. I only know it's one because it has the same identical qualification. It's evil. So all I can do is to pinpoint it. Hoti, as Aristotle would say. The question hoti, if it is. This is the question of existence, as we have it in later translations. And question of existence and essence in such things, metaphysical things, is rarely the same. I don't see essence of evil, and as I told one of my readers, I don't think human being is created to see it, it's rather created not to see it. The good is not, or the truth is not a map of meaning. It's not a mental map of the world. It is the truth. And knowing it is only piecemeal, as is the knowing the lie. You have to think, understand in time. There is no synoptic intuition that could give you one clear glance at everything at the same time. The reason why people fall in conspiracy theories is because this is what they seek. In a wrong way, they are seeking, in fact, these systems of meaning. But some who have deeper inclinations and who correspondingly fall even deeper are those who sense that there is, for instance, this one evil underneath everything, and believe that they can intuit it. And this is practically knocking on the doors of hell. I don't think calling devil to come out. I don't think this is smart thing to do. A lot of those people, if not all, end up in insanity. So this can only be in sequence. Knowing truth and telling the truth is something that is conjecturing, that is a process, and it is a lifelong process, with a hope of fulfillment in an afterlife, in fact, because the parameters of this life simply cannot accommodate such knowledge. Some think they can. I don't think so. I think glimpses can be given, or something that is also in itself piecemeal, but some total realization. This is not something that a human being can handle. We are not created in this way. So that would be, I would say, main point. So I beg you, please don't expect me to give you to write about Russians and delusions of Russia, not terrors, delusions of Russia, and what I consider, and I stand by this, by Russian Church. A Russian Church would be the essence of where the Russian spirit comes from, and delusion. So this is what I'm mainly talking about. Only it's so conflated with states that you cannot distinguish them, and you don't see it. You see the state, you see the one with weapons, but you don't see the one with thought. When I talk about it, don't expect me to at the same time talk about I don't know, Great Reset or such things. Great Reset, by the way, I don't consider that important. Conspiracy action, because it's not strong enough. Never was. These globalists of this kind are not the prime movers and shakers, in my opinion. Or better to say, with this eradication of sexual differences, which is the LBGTIQ, I think they are now called, this alphabet soup, which is, I think, the most destructive political drive and metaphysical delusion of the West, in the sense of Anglo-Saxon and Germanic, Nordic countries, but is not as present, and not only as present, it is actively opposed by most of the countries of Eastern Europe and Middle Europe even. So the West is not homogeneous. Let us reiterate this, and let us just bring one point up again. This is that what we do on Kalitribune, when we talk about these evils, which I'll call, or illusions that we want to dispel, we are talking about metaphysics, not about politics. And this has to be understood, because it's not the way that metaphysics was created by politics, as if politics transcended its limits and created this. No, it's the other way around. Metaphysical principle was contracted in history, in politics, or better to say anti-metaphysical principle, because this does not come from above. Let's say this transgender, homosexual marriages and such things, they come from below. But they are not political. That's the main reason. And the way they are expressed in politics is never so accurate that politics can be absolutely evil, and that through politics you came to absolute understanding of what this is. This is impossible. So you cannot correspondingly devise politics that can counter this. You have to rely yourself on metaphysical origin and what will come from that origin, not from political systems and so on and so forth. So this is one of the reasons why some people who are more intelligent are not only looking for maps of meaning, but concrete political projects to counter what is happening in their countries, fall for Russians, for instance, because Russians seem to provide this, and because Russian spirituality, at least at this point of their history, is completely political spirituality. This is not, there is nothing transcendent about it. It's all about space and conquering space. It can seem that this is it, but it is obviously not. I think that this is quite obvious now. So thank you for your attention. Stay tuned. There are some things in the works, some writings that will be maybe a more substantial form than this podcast, and be up soon, probably during next week. Thank you for your attention once again. This is Branko Malic of Kalitribune, signing out.